Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to our program. And now for the headlines.
President Duterte on Tuesday night lashed out at Vice President Leni Robredo for alleged grandstanding and questioning his absence during the onslaught of Typhoon Ulysses last week.
Donald Trump fires the government's top election security official who had rejected the president's claims of massive fraud in the vote he lost to Joe Biden.
And the WMO says we've run out of superlatives on the unprecedented hurricane season.
And finally, His Excellency Alfonso Ver, Philippine Ambassador in the Kingdom of Bahrain, thanks the Iglesia Ni Cristo for the aid to humanity care packages distributed to OFWs affected by the pandemic in the region.
First, President Duterte on Tuesday night lashed out at Vice President Leni Robredo for alleged grandstanding and questioning his absence during the onslaught of Typhoon Ulysses last week. The president labeled Robredo as dishonest for pretending not to know that he was attending the 37th Virtual ASEAN Summit and related summits from November 12 to the 15th. The president also accused the vice president of being showy during the typhoon response since she knew that he was busy attending the summit and could not make himself available. Take a look.
Before I proceed any further, I would like to just give a caution to the Vice President. She made a blunder, a big one, and she practically lied, making her incapable of truth. Alam mo, yung pakana niya na wala ako sa Baguio, I was here. Dito I was attending a summit, ASEAN summit yun. So virtual lang, palit-palit ka. DSWD siya, alam na niya. So lahat ng kailangan yun, nandoon na yung sa mga military, pati yung mga cabinet member. There was no need for you to make a very masamang biro. Now, where were you? Because sabihin ko tuloy sa iyo, what time did you go home? So, where were you? Hindi na kailangan ako mag-order at mag-order ka pa on the day. God, you are presuming that I should be giving orders on the day of the storm. That is stupid. That is why you cannot become a president, really. Mahina ka eh. Wala ka nang ibigay ang order kasi ang order na ibigay na 2 or 3 days. You do not give orders on the day of the war. Patay ka. So I don't hate to say this, but kung gano'n ka, huwag kang magtakbo ng preso. Talagang mahina ka. You do not know and then you lied. You were not honest. Isa pa yan. When you alam mo may summit going on. ASEAN Summit. Yun ang totoo dyan. Kaya ako lumipad doon sa Bicol. Inunahan mo ako pa kunwari. But do not compete with me. And do not start a quarrel with me. Kasi ikaw, wala ka talagang nagawa. Except yung mga tawag-tawag. Tawag ka kunwari, nasaan na yung mga helicopter, nalipad na ba? Of course, they would say yes. Your question would suggest the answer. Yung bang mga helicopter natin o na-deploy, yung ating mga yes, puro. Kita ka na insulto ka. You are not part of the command.
Now, in a tweet, the vice president debunked President Duterte's allegations, denying that her office did nothing during the height of the typhoon. She said her office was busy repacking relief goods in their headquarters in Quezon City.
President Rodrigo Duterte has declared the entire Luzon under a state of calamity after the successive typhoons that ravaged the country's largest island. In a taped speech aired on Tuesday night, Duterte bared that he signed the proposal of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council to place Luzon under a state of calamity. Malacanang, however, has yet to release the proclamation. A declaration of a state of calamity hastens rescue, relief, and rehabilitation efforts of the government and the private sector, including any international humanitarian assistance. It also effectively controls the prices of basic goods and commodities in affected areas. Quinta, which made landfall on October 25th, left 1.56 billion pesos and 2.66 billion pesos worth of damage to agriculture and infrastructure, respectively. Roli left 5 billion pesos worth of agricultural damage and 12.9 billion pesos worth of infrastructure damage. Typhoons Shawnee and Tonyo did not cause significant damages, but Ulysses left 2.1 billion pesos and 483 million pesos worth of damage to agriculture and infrastructure, respectively.
Meanwhile, Storm Iota has killed at least 10 people as it smashed homes, uprooted trees, and swamped roads during its destructive advance across Central America. According to authorities, just 2 weeks after Hurricane Eta devastated parts of the region. Iota, which made landfall in Nicaragua as a catastrophic Category 5 hurricane Monday, left 6 people dead in Nicaragua, 2 of them children who were trying to cross a river in the southern part of the country. Another 2 people died in the Colombian Caribbean archipelago of San Andres, Providencia, and Santa Catalina, as well as 1 woman in the indigenous community of Ngabe Bugle in Panama, where 2,005 people remain in shelters even as rains began to ease there. The Honduran government ordered the country's main roads closed until Wednesday due to the risk of overflowing rivers. Iota became the only Atlantic hurricane this year to reach Category 5 status, the maximum level on the Saffir-Simpson wind scale, soon before it made landfall in Nicaragua on Monday evening.
Estaba demasiado fuerte el viento. Entonces cuando estoy sintiendo mi casa ya estaba así menudeando. Entonces yo tuve que salir con mi hijo, botó mi casa, se lo llevó. Toda la casa yo sentía como que venía encima. Ahora me quedé sin trastes, sin ropa, sin nada. Ahora estoy en la calle.
The United Nations warned of catastrophic consequences from Hurricane Iota, the second major tropical cyclone to hit Central America this month. For the first time on record, the Atlantic has experienced 2 major hurricanes in November at a time when the season is usually winding down. Watch this.
Cyclones are unfortunately Central America, along with parts of Southeast Asia, are now currently bearing witness to the force of this of tropical cyclones, of hurricanes. We're running out of superlatives for this Atlantic hurricane season. It's record breaking in every sense of the word. We are currently with Iota on the 30th named tropical storm of the Atlantic hurricane season. Iota made landfall in Nicaragua as a very, very strong Category 4 hurricane. It was borderline Category 5. This is a time of year when the season should normally be winding down, and it's not. In fact, we're seeing this sort of very tragic late surge in action. Iota is the strongest storm in the season so far to make landfall. And as we are seeing before our eyes, and my colleagues will elaborate more on this, it will have potentially very devastating consequences. It's the first time, as I said, in November that we've seen two major hurricanes, and Iota made landfall less than 2 weeks after Hurricane Eta, which was also a very strong Category 4 hurricane, made landfall just 25 kilometers apart. So we're having these huge impacts hitting basically the same area. Nicaragua, Honduras, other parts of Central America have not recovered from Hurricane Eta, and now they're being slammed by this new, terrific, powerful hurricane. And the U.S. National Hurricane Center has said that there is a 40% chance of yet another tropical cyclone forming in the Caribbean in the next 5 days. So obviously we're watching that very closely and monitoring it.
Speaking to colleagues in the region over the past few days, it's been notable how alarmed people are about the situation. The Vice President of the Honduran Red Cross said, for example, that in his 20 years of leading emergency responses in his country, he has never once seen a situation like this where a major hurricane was followed almost immediately by actually a stronger hurricane following almost precisely the same path.
With winds reaching up to 260 kilometers per hour, Iota is the strongest hurricane storm in the season so far to make landfall. It is also the 30th tropical storm of the hurricane season, the highest number on record. In May, the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration forecast an above-normal 2020 Atlantic hurricane season ahead, with a likely range of 13 to 19 named storms. However, with Iota making the 30th storm, the season has surpassed predictions.
Meanwhile, thousands of democracy activists gathered in downtown Bangkok on Wednesday for a second day of protest after 6 people were shot during violent clashes as lawmakers voted on possible constitutional reforms. Thailand has been rocked by months of protests demanding changes to the constitution, the removal of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, and even changes to the untouchable monarchy. But Tuesday saw the most violent confrontation since the movement began in July. Protesters gathered on Wednesday at the Ratchaprasong Junction in Bangkok Shopping and Commercial Heart after their leaders vowed to step up the movement. Prime Minister Prayut has urged protesters to refrain from violence but ruled out introducing another emergency decree like the one banning public gatherings of more than 4 people, which spanned a week in October. But there is little sign the demonstrators are prepared to back down. Late Tuesday, prominent student leader Parit Penguin Shirawak said a new era in the movement had begun. More than 50 people were injured, mostly by tear gas, according to an ambulance and medical coordination service, which said that 6 people were shot. Lawmakers have this week been discussing various proposals for constitutional change, which mostly exclude any reform to the monarchy. One proposal seeks to replace the military-appointed Senate with directly elected representatives. It was Senate support that allowed the Premier, Prayut Chan-o-cha, to hold on to power after last year's election. Parliament began voting on Wednesday, which amendments are to be debated further.
Donald Trump on Tuesday fired the U.S. government's top election security official who had rejected the president's unsubstantiated claims of massive fraud in the vote he lost to Joe Biden. Trump announced on Twitter the termination, effective immediately, of Chris Krebs, who led the agency that jointly declared the November 3rd election was the most secure in American history. Krebs was in charge of fending off possible foreign and domestic hacker intrusions into myriad voting, sorting, and counting machines, as well as databases and other systems that states and localities rely on to tally ballots. The White House was reportedly particularly unhappy about a CISA website or webpage set up to fight disinformation called Rumor versus Reality. The page rejected claims by Trump and others that many votes had been cast in the names of dead people, that counting the ballots days after Election Day was not normal, and that shifting vote counts indicated fraud.
And staying in the U.S., senior U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley, 87 years old, tested positive for the coronavirus, the latest of some 24 American lawmakers who have contracted COVID-19 this year as the pandemic surges nationwide. He tweeted that he'll be following his doctor's orders, CDC guidelines, and continue to quarantine. The Iowa Republican is the second oldest senator in the 100-member chamber. Grassley is also president pro tempore of the U.S. Senate, which makes him third in line to the presidency after the vice president and the speaker of the House of Representatives. He's the second senator to isolate this week after Florida's Rick Scott entered quarantine for coming into contact with someone who later tested positive for the virus. Scott has tested negative but remains at home.
That in all things appertaining to the trial of the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, now pending, you will do it.
We'll take a short break. Eagle News, we'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by RJK Services Manpower Agency Corporation.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
A wildfire tore through neighborhoods in southwest Reno. It burned down homes, snarled traffic, and choked the air with smoke. The Pine Haven fire broke out just southwest of Coughlin Ranch at about 1 p.m. In an AP report, Reno Fire Chief David Cochran said as many as 500 homes could be threatened by the blaze that grew to 1,500 acres within hours of igniting in brush above the neighborhood. He said multiple homes had been lost, but he did not know how many. Evacuations and road closures will be in effect all night. Reno Police Department Commander Joe Robinson said that a police presence will be set up around the vacant properties in the evacuation zone.
And take a look. Inmates are moving bodies into refrigerated trucks, said the El Paso County Office of the Medical Examiner Forensic Laboratory. COVID-19 cases have been soaring in this border city of West Texas, and inmates from the county's detention facility are assisting with the moving of bodies. Meanwhile, coronavirus cases in Texas are soaring again, but this time Governor Greg Abbott said no lockdown is coming. The governor's strategy as the state heads into the holidays is to stay the course, relying on a 2-month-old blueprint to claw back reopenings regionally based on hospitalizations. The mask order remains in place. In recent days, Texas has reported daily new case tallies so far or on par with where the state was during its summer spike. A record 10,826 new cases were reported on Tuesday, U.S. time, surpassing the previous high of 10,791 in mid-July.
Chinese health officials said Wednesday that 2 cold chain storage workers in the port city of Tianjin were infected with COVID-19 as the country shifts focus to contaminated imports after a number of outbreaks linked to frozen food. 2 cities in southern Fujian province said Wednesday they found traces of the virus in shipments of pomfret from India and beef from Argentina. In Wuhan, where COVID-19 first emerged late last 2019, authorities said last week they had detected the virus on frozen beef from Brazil, while several other cities reported positive test results on samples from imported food, including Argentinian pork and Indian cuttlefish. Customs data in September showed that Chinese meat imports had increased by more than 70% this year as the country's food supply was disrupted by swine fever and heavy flooding, which destroyed swathes of farmland. The World Health Organization says there is currently no evidence that people can catch COVID-19 from food or food packaging.
After struggling for months to get its spiraling COVID-19 death toll under control, Brazil is now threatened by the nightmare scenario that has already shaken the U.S. and Europe, a second wave. Brazil has been one of the countries hit hardest by the pandemic, with more than 106,000 people killed, the second highest number in the world following the U.S. After a seemingly endless plateau with more than 1,000 deaths a day from June to August on a 7-day rolling average, the numbers had finally been falling in the giant country of 212 million people. But after dropping to as low as 350 deaths per day early last week, the rolling average has now risen above 400 again. There's also a worrying trend in the number of hospitalizations. Sao Paulo, the state hit hardest by the virus, registered an 18% increase in COVID-19 hospitalizations last week. Now that led the state government to put the brakes on its gradual exit from partial lockdown. However, 8 months after the pandemic reached the country, Brazilians are showing signs of fatigue with social distancing measures. In the country's largest cities, shops, schools, cinemas, and gyms have reopened, and beaches, bars, and restaurants are regularly packed with crowds.
Thousands of people gather in Berlin to protest against government measures to curb the spread of coronavirus. Police on Wednesday fired water cannon to disperse thousands of unmasked protesters who had massed in central Berlin to demonstrate against government measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus. After repeated warnings for the crowd to put on their nose and mouth coverings went unheeded, police said they would take action to clear the protest and detain violators. MPs were set to grant state governments formal powers to limit social contact to help halt the spread of the virus, putting the shutdown measures on a firmer legal footing. Several hundred aggressive demonstrators had already tried in late August to storm the Reichstag building, where the Bundestag lower house meets, during a rally against coronavirus rules, in a protest Chancellor Angela Merkel condemned as shameful.
Now, according to the National Task Force Against COVID-19 Chief Implementer and Vaccine Czar, Carlito Galvez Jr., the government continues to examine the proper way to get vaccines. Currently, our vaccine experts and the FDA have listed 17 possible sources of vaccines from different countries. President Duterte also stressed that frontliners, the poor, and Filipinos from the vulnerable communities will be given priority in the distribution of the vaccine. Take a look.
Tuloy po yung evaluation po ng ating vaccine of experts at saka ng FDA kung ano po yung tamang solusyon ng pagkukuha ng vaccine. At ang ating pong vaccine of expert ay nirank po yung 17 po ang ating pong possible sources of vaccines sa iba't ibang mga bansa. At out of the 17 po, sir, siyam po yung nasa tinatawag nating phase 3 trial. At sa phase 3 trial po nito, 3 po doon ang magkakaroon po ng trial dito po sa atin this coming December and January. Nagpapasalamat po tayo kay Enrique Rason na meron po rin siya ng binigay na 300,000 doses, ang BDO at saka po yung ibang mga Lusutan Group at saka San Miguel Corporation at saka Go Negosyo. Nakapag-raise na po sila ng more than 1 million and hopefully, baka tataas pa yun ng 1 or 2 million doses. Ito po para po sa kanilang mga, do-donate po nila yung 80 to 50% of the vaccine at saka yung iba po gagamitin po nila sa kanilang mga poor essential workers po. At no cost po sa ano po natin. Kung magkakaroon po tayo ng advance procurement po, by the end of the year, pwede po natin magkaroon po tayo ng signing of the loan agreements. Kaya po ang aming po na recommendation po, Mr. President, next slide please, ay we enter on the advanced market commitment through the multilateral arrangement with World Bank and ADB as our finance manager.
Thank you. So, mga kababayan ko, nang narinig ninyo si General Galvez, ito yung pamaraan kung paano makuha. Iba't ibang pamaraan paano makuha natin ang COVID. Yun ang sinasabi ko. Whatever it is, I have full faith and trust in the task force that we have this commitment that we will start with the poorest of the poor.
We will start with the frontliners and then yung mga poor and vulnerable communities.
South Australia announced a 6-day circuit breaker lockdown for its nearly 2 million people Wednesday to contain a sudden coronavirus outbreak that ended months-long streaks of no infections. Schools, shops, pubs, factories, and even takeaway restaurants were told to close at midnight, and stay-at-home orders were issued for residents across the state. A total of 22 cases have now been linked to a cluster that emerged from an Adelaide hotel used to quarantine travelers from overseas.
We are going hard and we are going early. Time is of the essence and we must act swiftly and decisively. We cannot wait to see how bad this becomes. We must act swiftly and decisively on the health advice to stay ahead of the game. That health advice is that we need a circuit breaker. We need a circuit breaker to stay ahead of this.
The state is the first in Australia to issue a blanket ban on outdoor exercise, and mask wearing will be required across the state, which had not recorded a significant outbreak since April. The measures stand in stark contrast to the United States, where some politicians are refusing to implement basic virus measures even as case numbers surge, or Europe, where lockdowns were introduced only after infection spiraled. Chief Health Officer Nicholas Purrier said the infections appeared to be caused by a particularly virulent strain that was spreading very, very rapidly, with people becoming contagious within just 24 hours.
This particular strain has had certain characteristics. It has a very, very short incubation period. That means when somebody gets exposed, it's taking 24 hours or even less for that person to become infectious to others. And the other characteristic of the cases we've seen so far is they've had minimal symptoms and sometimes no symptoms, but have been able to pass it on to other people.
Spurrier said the state hoped to avoid a lengthy Melbourne-style lockdown. Residents in Australia's second-largest city spent months mostly confined to their homes after security bungles at a hotel quarantine. The surprise announcement sparked a fresh round of panic buying in Adelaide, prompting supermarkets to introduce 2-item limits for certain goods and to issue assurances they would remain open.
Russian President Vladimir Putin calls on BRICS member countries to mass-produce Russian-made coronavirus vaccines. Speaking during the online summit of BRICS countries chaired by Russia, the president said that the other 4 members, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, should unite to manufacture and distribute coronavirus vaccines produced by Russia. Take a look.
Очень важно. Вакцины есть российские, они работают эффективно, безопасно. Вопрос в том, чтобы осуществить массовое производство. Это стоит. И, конечно, здесь очень важно объединять усилия по массовому выпуску в широкий гражданский оборот этой продукции.
Now, President Putin noted that Russia has agreements in place with India and Brazil to conduct clinical trials of its Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine, as well as manufacturing agreements with China and India. The world's largest vaccine producer is in India, the Serum Institute of India. Now, Russia has registered 2 coronavirus vaccines as the global race heats up in producing an effective vaccine to combat the pandemic, which has now claimed the lives of 1.3 million people.
Chinese President Xi Jinping delivers a keynote speech during the 12th BRICS summit hosted by Russia via video link. He proposed to convene a BRICS symposium on traditional medicine to explore its role in coronavirus prevention and treatment. He said the global economy is experiencing the worst recession since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Watch this.
和平与发展的时代主题没有改变，世界多极化和经济全球化的时代潮流也不可能逆转。我们要为人民福祉着想，秉持人类命运共同体理念，用实际行动为建设美好世界做出应有贡献。我们都在同一艘船上，风高浪急之时，我们更要把准方向，把握好节奏，团结合作，乘风破浪，行稳致远，驶向更加美好的明天。
领导人同意。The virtual summit hosted by Russia President Vladimir Putin was attended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. President Xi said China has joined the COVAX facility and will actively consider providing vaccines to BRICS countries where there is a need. The World Health Organization has said 9 candidate vaccines, including 2 from China, are currently being evaluated for inclusion in the COVAX facility. The COVAX is co-led by Gavi, an international vaccine alliance, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and the WHO. Its aim is to accelerate the development and manufacture of vaccines.
And Health Minister Eteni Longondo in the Democratic Republic of Congo on Wednesday declared the end of its latest Ebola epidemic, closing the file of an outbreak in the northwestern province of Equateur that claimed 55 lives in nearly 6 months. Now, the World Health Organization said the latest outbreak had killed 55 people, among 119 confirmed and 11 probable cases since June 1. Wednesday's announcement came after the Democratic Republic of Congo crossed a threshold of 42 days without a recorded case, double the period that the deadly hemorrhagic virus takes to incubate. As during a preceding epidemic in the east of the country, widespread use of vaccinations, which were administered to more than 40,000 people, helped curb the disease, according to the WHO. The outbreak in Equateur erupted as Ebola fighters were still battling the epidemic in the east and amid tough measures since ease to combat the coronavirus.
We still have more updates for you. Please don't go away.
This portion is brought to you by Canreef Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel hand dryers.
Residents of the Pakistani village of Tajan salvage whatever is left of destroyed houses after deadly shelling by Indian troops. Indian and Pakistani forces on Friday waged their biggest artillery battle of the past year, leaving more than 13 dead and dozens wounded on both sides of their disputed Kashmir frontier, and that is according to officials. Officials from the two sides said artillery and machine gun clashes were reported along the 740-kilometer ceasefire line that has separated the nuclear-armed rivals for the past 7 decades.
मकान बनाने ये जनाब अली काफर गोला मार के फिर जनाब अली ऐसा गिरा छोड़े जीडी हस्ते जनाब जमा पूंजी आज तक बूढ़े हो गए 70 साल की उम्र हो गई है ये जो कोई माल डंगर जो कोई जैसा माल जायदाद थी सब कोई जला दी थी
जिस वक्त मर्जी आती है वो बम बरसा के और मिसाइल बम बरसाता है मिसाइल बरसाता है और ये आपके सामने ये सारी चीज ये हमारे 13-14 घर जो है उसने 10 मिनट में जला दिए
Meanwhile, residents in the Afghan city of Kabul gave their takes after the U.S. said it will slash troop levels in Afghanistan and Iraq to their lowest levels in nearly 20 years of war, rejecting concerns that precipitous drawdowns could give up all the U.S. has fought for. Acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller said around 2,000 troops would be pulled from Afghanistan by the 15th of January. Let's listen in.
By January 15th, 2021, our forces, their size in Afghanistan, will be 2,500 troops. Our force size in Iraq will also be 2,500 by that same date. And we all will execute this repositioning in a way that protects our fighting men and women, our partners in the intelligence community and diplomatic corps, and our superb allies that are critical to rebuilding Afghan and Iraqi security capabilities and civil society.
به نظر من با خارج شدن نیروهای خارجی از افغانستان باعث این میشه که طالبان خشونت‌هایشان در سرتاسر افغانستان افزایش پیدا کنند باعث این میشه خانم‌ها آسیب بیشتری ببینن و نقشی که قبلا ایفا می‌کردن نتونن ایفا کنن.
تا وقتی نیروهای آمریکایی از افغانستان خارج بشه و خلای قدرت اصلی در افغانستان با وجود بیاید که نیروهای همکار آمریکایی هم از اینجا خارج بشه طالبان به دنبال از اینکه قدرت سیاسی بیشتری در افغانستان را بگیره خشونت را افزایش میده که تنها ابزار اونها برای کسب قدرت در افغانستان فعلا همین افزایش قدرت است که افغانستان را در مسیر بسیار خطرناک قرار میده.
Amid criticism that President Trump was acting abruptly since his defeat, White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said the troop cuts have been in the works for some time. It also comes 10 days after President Trump fired Defense Secretary Mark Esper, who had insisted on keeping 4,500 troops in Afghanistan to support the Afghan security forces. Esper had reduced U.S. forces from about 13,000 following a deal with the Taliban in February, in which both sides agreed the Taliban would enter into peace talks with the Kabul government in return for U.S. troops withdrawing by May 2021. But until Esper's removal, the Pentagon had argued that the Taliban had not met pledges to reduce violent attacks, which have surged across the country in recent months.
The dry and dusty village of Azizabad sits on the front line of Afghanistan's war and is currently under government control, but only just. Every night, 20-year-old paramilitary policeman Zainullah and his colleagues must seek refuge in filthy trenches at their battered outpost on the edge of the village while insurgents target them at an increasingly fierce tempo. Watch this.
خراب دي وضعیت ډیر خراب دي د شپې خو بیا بیخي خراب دي د شپې داسې کار دی دلته کښېنستی نوس په دا ځای کې اوس لا دا دلته ناست یو د شپې نوس کښېنستی د دغه تېرکشه راباسي مرمۍ ادونه کې مرمۍ د دا تېرکشه وباسي
دلته موږ په ډېره په تلفات ورکړي دي شهیدان مو کړي زه خپله زخمي شوی یم زما بل ورور مین ولی دی دوه وروڼه مې شهیدان شوي دي پکښې کې په دغه دولت کې دا خط پوسته موږ نیولې ده په دغه طالبان په دغه ساحه کې خبرې چې دا شروع شوي دي څه سره کښېنستلي دي موږ ته خو د نور توپیر نه دی راکړی جنګ در هغه زیات شوی دی ولې طالبان د دغسې نه بیرېږي تیارې بمبار نه دي پر کړی دوی ډېر ډله ییزه جنګ کوي اوس پر هر سیمه چې طالب ورغلی هغه پوسته وړي
دلته پراته دي اخوا ته تللي دي که څوک هغه خلک چې خپل ځان چې دې خوا ته خواري پیدا کوی سوی هغه دې خوا ته راغلي دي چې اخوا چې پیدا کوی سوی هغه اخوا ته تللي دي
An Indian street dog that lost its front legs after being run over by a train will be heading to a new home in Britain after enduring a year of therapy and learning to walk again with prosthetic limbs. Take a look.
लग रहा था मैंने उसको एक हेल्दी डॉगी का जो है ब्लड ट्रांसफ्यूजन किया और इसके बाद धीरे धीरे इलाज करते करते उसको काफ़ी सुधार हुआ पिछले पैर में फ्रैक्चर था उसमें पस बन चुका था तो धीरे धीरे वो भी रिकवर हो गया और आज हमारे पास अच्छे कंडीशन में है और वो लंदन जाने के लिए तैयार है
लॉकडाउन के दौरान हमने इसके नकली पैर लगाए ताकि ये चल सके लेकिन अभी ये पूरी तरह फिट नहीं हो पाया है चलने के लिए अभी इसको और समय लगेगा
रॉकी बहुत ही हिम्मत वाला डॉग है इतना कुछ होने के बाद ट्रेन के एक्सीडेंट होने के बाद दोनों पैरों को गंवाने के बाद इसमें अभूतपूर्व साहस बहुत हिम्मत बहुत ताकत है जो कि अपने जीवन को जीने की इसमें हिम्मत आई है अब यह है लंदन के लिए उड़ने को तैयार है कुछ ही देर में
OFWs hit by the recent pandemic received food and essentials at the Philippine Embassy in Bahrain. Lorlyn Kalimlim reports from Bahrain. Lorlyn.
We are here at the Philippine Embassy here in Manama, Kingdom of Bahrain, where members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo, or Church of Christ, are aiding their fellow countrymen as part of their worldwide humanitarian program. In spite of the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic, members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo continue to uphold their advocacy of helping others in different parts of the world. Here in Bahrain, members have distributed luggages, clothes, feminine kits, and milk to distressed OFWs and their children at the OWA Care Center. This is made possible in coordination with the Philippine Ambassador to the Kingdom, His Excellency Alfonso A. Ver.
Una po sa lahat, on behalf of the Embassy and all the wards at the Embassy Shelter, gusto ko lang ho magpasalamat sa Iglesia Ni Cristo sa inyong patuloy at matatanging pagtulong sa ating mga kababayan na nangangailangan. Lalo na po sa panahon ng pandemya na tuloy pa rin ang inyong pagtulong kahit may pandemya. Wala ho tayong takot at buti na lang din po nandito tayo sa Bahrain at mas alaga rin tayo dito sa pagpapagamot, sa pagtetest at may mga Pilipino po dito na tinamaan na po at meron na rin pong mga nasawi. Pero sa lahat-lahat pa rin po, safe pa rin po tayo dito at nagbubukas na rin ang economy at sana po makapagbalik na sa trabaho ang ating mga kababayan at tuloy na rin ang kanilang pamumuhay, tuloy na rin ang kanilang pagsuporta sa kanilang pamilya, na malusog sila at masaya at kahit paano back to normal, kahit ibang-iba na po dito sa pandemya. So as a last note, I'd just like to take this opportunity once again. I recall the fond memories, the visit of Executive Minister Eduardo V. Manalo last year. It was an honor and privilege for us, for the Filipinos here, to welcome him and for the immense project and that he did here. And we will always remember that. And today, now a year later, even with the COVID pandemic, the same fire and intensity of helping our fellow men is still there. And that we look forward when we go back to normal times. So we hope that he could come back and join us again here in the Kingdom of Bahrain. Maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat.
Magandang araw po. Narito kami ngayon sa bulwagan ng pasuguan ng Pilipinas dito sa bansang Bahrain upang isagawa ang Aid to Humanity bilang paggunita sa kaarawan ng ating tagapamahalang pangkalahatan, ang kapatid ni Eduardo V. Manalo. At nagpapasalamat po tayo dahil ang ating butihing ambasador ay nakasama natin ngayon upang maisagawa ang isang banal na layunin ng Iglesia ni Cristo na tumulong sa ating mga kababayan, lalo na sa mga nangangailangan ng tulong katulad nito. Dapat ay sagawan natin ng napakalaking paglingap dito, pero dahil sa sinusunod po na health protocol ng gobyerno ay limitado lang po. Subalit, nagpapasalamat po tayo dahil natupad natin ang isang layunin na pinakahangad ng Iglesia ni Cristo na makatulong tayo sa ating kababayan. Muli, happy birthday po, Sir, kay Eduardo V. Manalo. At asahan po ninyo na lagi nyo kaming kaisa sa lahat ng inyong layunin. At mula po dito sa bansang Bahrain, ay nagpapasalamat po kami ng marami at happy birthday po ulit. Salamat po.
Ako po si Miriam Halibas. Galing po ako Mindanao. Wala po akong masyadong karanasan sa COVID kasi hindi po ako nakakalabas. At andito po ako sa embassy kasi po 2 taon akong nagtatrabaho dito. Finish contract po ako. At nakulong po ako dahil inakusahan ako ng amo ko na nagnakaw. But I was vindicated. So andito po ako ngayon sa embassy. At saka so far, hinihintay ko na lang po yung resulta ng attorney ko para po makauwi ako. At itong tulong po na natanggap namin galing sa iglesia ay malaking tulong po sa lahat ng ward at sa lahat ng Pilipino na distress na andito ngayon sa embassy. Malaking tulong po kasi sa kawalan at saka sila po yung inspirasyon namin para bumangon ulit at makauwi sa pamilya namin ng kumpleto. Nawala na po dinadaing na problema.
Ang pagtulong po sa mga nangangailangan at ang programang Aid to Humanity sa pangunguna po ng tagapamahalang pangkalahatan, ang kapatid na Eduardo V. Manalo, ay ginagawa po ng buong Iglesia ni Cristo sa buong mundo para po hindi lamang po maibigay sa kanila ang kanilang mga pangunahing pangangailangan, kundi mapalakas din po ang kanilang espiritual na pamumuhay. Kaya po ngayon po sa pagse-celebrate ng birthday po ng tagapamahalang pangkalahatan ay ipinasya po ng Iglesia ni Cristo na gawin po ang pagtulong pong ito sa mga mamamayan na nasa ibang bansa para po mapalakas ang kanilang loob at maipakilala sa kanila ang Iglesia ni Cristo at ang kahalagahan po ng salita ng ating Panginoon Diyos.
Whenever anybody needs help, the spirit of gift-giving will be very evident. And whichever part of the world you may be, the Filipino teamwork will always be recognizable. This is Lorlyn Kalimlim, your Eagle News correspondent from Bahrain, and we live in interesting times.
Thank you, Lorlyn.
That was really cute about the dog.
Oh, yeah?
Thank you for showing that to us. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm CJ Hero. Join us again tomorrow.
And as I always say, at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.